On this episode of Survive and Thrive 8791, I welcome Stacy Mower to the Buck and Honey's remote studios. Stacy's story is a glimpse into a grim diagnosis within a family. After high school, Stacy found a career path in Madison, Wisconsin, but her world shifted. At just 24 years old, she learned that her mother had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Despite her career and studying her own family, Stacy supported her mother through an 8-year battle after her mother's passing. Her story is a reminder of what it takes to face life's toughest moments. This will be a good one. Here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. What is up? Wherever you are, whatever you happen to be doing, I hope you're having a great day. Welcome to another episode of Survive and Thrive 8791. I'm your host, Coach Decora. We are in the Buck and Honey's remote studios on the east side of our great capital city of Madison, Wisconsin. You can listen to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, iHeartRadio, and YouTube at Survive and Thrive 8791. You can follow the podcast on Facebook at Survive and Thrive 8791, the podcast, or you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at TDecora 8791, as well as hitting me up on Facebook at Tim Decora. Don't forget to hit that subscribe or like button wherever you listen to the show. Leave me a comment if you'd like what you heard. If there's a topic or you know a guest who would love to tell their story, email me at tdecora@gmail.com. Once again, glad you could join us today. Our mission is to share stories and conversations that make you cry, laugh, and think, stimulating emotions, creating laughter, and inspiring the mind. A new episode will air on Monday and Thursday morning featuring a wide range of guests. The podcast will touch on many subjects such as, but not limited to, grief, loss of a loved one, recovery, professional setback, divorce, success despite challenges, etc. Our guests will share how they learn to survive and thrive. This is where we introduce our guest, and our guest is my good friend over here, Stacy Mower. According to the internet, and the internet is always right, correct, Stacy?
Never.
Never. I think my wife would agree with you. I don't need the internet. I don't need Google. My wife is always right.
Very good.
In the United States, the U.S. of A., it is estimated that nearly 500,000 new cases of Alzheimer's disease are diagnosed each year. Almost 2/3 of Americans with Alzheimer's are women. That's why today's guest is here. Stacy Mower is here to talk about and celebrate her mother, Vicki Hintz, who at age 56 was diagnosed with Alzheimer's kind of at the very beginning of this whole Alzheimer's diagnosis back in the mid-1990s. With that being said, today I welcome my good friend, Stacy Mower, to the Buck and Honey's remote studios, born and raised in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. And for those of you listeners that are from Wisconsin, we would just refer to that as Point. Stacy is a proud graduate of SPASH, Stevens Point Area Senior High. After high school, Stacy would take her talents to the University of Stevens Point and Madison College. After work experiences in many areas, she has found her home for the last 20 years in the IT field. That would be information technology. Today, I'm so glad you could join us. Stacy Mower, what is up?
Thanks, Mr. Decora.
Everybody loves that, and I'm glad you do. We're actually in the basement of our condo, and every couple months, Stacy comes and stays with us. The office that she works at, Summit Credit Union, is just a stone's throw from our condominium, and Stacy moved, which we'll get into in a little bit, moved up north. Big question. What do you miss besides your old ex-neighbors? What do you miss about Madison?
Well, I don't miss the traffic, but just the shopping, the friends, the whole atmosphere. I mean, there was a reason that I wanted to come down here for school, and it was always so vibrant and just a little bigger than growing up in Point, which I thought was, well, actually I grew up in Plover, which was a little more on the outskirts in the farm community.
A suburb of Stevens Point, Plover. Mm-hmm. You're missing the big city a little bit compared to where you are at. So you sold your house, and for the listeners, the Mowers lived across the street from us in Wanakee, where we had lived for 27 years, and some of those years the Mowers lived across the street, so we got pretty close to them. They sold their house and moved up north and became Youpers.
Don't you know?
Became Youpers. So for those listeners that are out there, because we are in 9 countries, including the United States, tell everybody real quick what your version of a Youper is. UPER.
Somebody who's resilient. It's a little more rougher country to live in. People who, really enjoy foraging and really getting back to nature and hiking. The national forests there are gorgeous and amazing. There's a reason there's such a huge tourist industry there. And it's so peaceful.
Peaceful. And it's the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, hence a little bit of the Youper there. What do you like about living up there? You kind of alluded to it already, but is there any other thing other than...
I would say, the wildlife. Also, my husband was born there. So it's always been our favorite place to be. And my father-in-law, Henry Mower, always called it God's country. And it really is. When you're up there, you feel it.
And you have a compound. The family has a compound up there too, right?
Yes, internally we call it the compound.
A spread of land dotted with some houses, and
it's generations that have lived there. Yes.
Yes, I would think snowmobiling is big up there, snowshoeing,
skiing,
and you talked about the wildlife, bear, and yeah, and just not having the rat race of even the city the size of Stevens Point, which is a fraction of the size of Madison, but a lot less traffic. You had mentioned. Let's go this. Which do you like better, Madison or up north?
Oh, up north. But I get a little bit of both, so I cheat.
Yeah, you do. And we like that you cheat because you get to come here and we're going to sample some of your jambalaya a little later. Before we get to your story, I need to talk about our sponsor. Our sponsor, Buck and Honey's Restaurants, are a place that people can escape to. For me, it's a great escape from cooking. Do you cook dinner? Yes, you do. With an eye roll. With their great food and drink menu, 5-star customer service, and a welcoming and vibrant atmosphere, people keep coming back. With locations in Sun Prairie, Monona, Wanakee, and Mount Horeb, most communities in the Dane County area can get to a Buck and Honey's within 10 to 15 minutes. Another drum roll. Have you been to Buck and Honey's?
Oh, definitely.
Definitely. Do you remember? There was one right there in Wanakee. What was your favorite? Can you recall?
There's an appetizer that they have, some bacon-wrapped dates with the goat cheese in the middle, right?
Yes.
Oh, I'd love those.
You're the second person this week that's been on the episode that has talked about the bacon-wrapped dates. I'm a big pizza guy, so Bomber's Special is high on my priority list. On the podcast, our guests follow the format for sharing their story like this. In segment 1, we talk about what was it like, so we'll get into Stacy's history, what happened, and that's to get her on the podcast. And in segment 2, we continue to talk about what happened and then get into what it's like now and discuss her 5 suggestions for thriving. So a little history. You grew up in Stevens Point, just under 2 hours north of Madison, due north. What was life like growing up there? Because you kind of had a little twinkle in your eye when we started going through the script, and that just came pouring out of you.
First thing that always pops in my head is that I didn't appreciate it. I thought I was stuck there, and I realized growing up, we had a fantastic home, suburb area, great neighbors. I grew up not too far away from the Little Plover River. You popped out of your house, hopped on your bike, had the whole day, till Mom was flickering the lights or yelling for us to come in. It was idyllic.
When the street lamps come on, that's
home.
Time for you to come home.
Exactly.
So yes, I've been up there before, and it's just nice country, and the river rolls through there. And yes, tell our listeners about your family. We talked about your mom a little bit, but go ahead and spin some yarns quick.
Let's see. My mom was a dedicated nurse her whole life. She was an LPN and then went back to school while I was a teenager to obtain her registered nurse license. So there was 3 years of her doing that, both working full-time, raising a family, and then going back to school. Lots to admire there. My dad fully supported her entire life. He worked at Century Insurance for many, many years in IT. And then I've got a little brother who's a couple years younger than me, Scott Michael.
Scott Michael. And you've got a family of your own. Tell us about your own family. You're surrounded by men.
I'm surrounded by men. I always like to say that.
Even the dog.
Even the dog. Yes, I have a wonderful husband of 31 years, 32 coming up in November, and two beautiful, lovely young gentlemen. Amazing. My eldest, Theodore, and my youngest, Francesco, Ted and Frank.
Good guys. I've spent a lot of time with them, both as young little guys and then getting to see them over the years. And now, yes, they are full-grown men. Lots of elbows and asses in your house now just because of, bigger dudes. After a year of college in Point, you leave for Madison. And what was the lure, Madison?
Well, I was looking for, after not applying myself at Stevens Point, I was really like doing the whole soul searching, what I wanted to do as a career, and found that METC, Madison College, but when I went there, it was different.
Madison Area Technical College, yes.
Had a great hospitality management program. Moved down there, it was when the Truex campus was open. So I went there and registered for classes and literally walked across the street and got my first job. And I worked there for 7 years at the Concourse Hotel right downtown.
Oh, right downtown. I do remember that. After college, after MATC, you're in the hospitality, and I think that would play a huge role whether you knew it or not in the IT field. But tell us about some of the other experiences that has led to that career. Did you do anything else? You talked about Famous Footwear. Yeah,
I worked for Famous Footwear at the corporate headquarters. Yeah, when growing up, getting married, deciding to start a family, the hospitality industry really didn't seem like it was going to be a good fit. So from there, went and started as an administrative assistant at Famous Footwear and worked my way up the ladder. Turned out I had an aptitude for some things and slowly shifted my way into positions of like an IT liaison at Famous. And unfortunately, after I think 7 years there, they decided to merge fully with Brown Shoe Company, and was given the opportunity to move down to St. Louis, Missouri, where they were at, but decided that, the Waunakee area was for us. So
and
from
that
there,
wasn't going to work.
Nope, it was not going to work.
I think if I remember correctly, there were times where you had to go down there for a couple of visits, and maybe they were trying to lure you and Dino, and you found that, comparing apples to oranges, you found that just raising kids in Waunakee was going to be a lot better than down there.
Absolutely.
The reason we have you on the show today is to talk about your mom. And unfortunately, as long as we've known each other, I never got to know or met your mom. But I think if the apple doesn't fall far from the tree usually, I would probably say that she was a very nice woman because of the way that you are. And how it's probably your hospitality business and being involved in that, but I think it probably has a little bit to do with your mom and dad just being good people.
I would agree wholeheartedly.
Wholeheartedly. After you left the comforts of home and Point at the age of 24, you moved to Madison, and your mom is diagnosed with Alzheimer's. She is 56 years old, and that's rather young because that's the age that you and I are right now. Right now. What was your first thought when you were told that?
Denial. I was not living with my parents anymore, obviously, and it was something that was hard to swallow. It wasn't anything that is prevalent in society at that time as it is today. Nope. I think when you and I were talking last night, the term senile came up, or
pre-senile.
Pre-senile.
Yes.
And it was something that, and cognition wasn't a term that was used regularly either. But, when she started making mistakes at work, that was really the big trigger that something was going on.
So we looked, and I did a little research after we talked last night and this morning. Alzheimer's has been around, and it was discovered in, hopefully nobody's going to fact check me, but 1906 was a guy by the name of, his last name was Alzheimer, who was a doctor and kind of pointed and did some diagnoses on some people and decided to name it after himself, which is what happened a lot back then. But then we fast forward to the mid 80s, and Alzheimer's disease was fairly new. And then even in the 90s when your mom was diagnosed, it was probably still fairly new in big cities and metropolitan areas, but certainly probably not central Wisconsin, Stevens Point. You talked about some of the red flags or symptoms. She was working as a nurse, and you talked about one of those. What was specifically that red flag?
Unfortunately, or should I say fortunately, she, being a nurse on the floor, that was back when they were actually manually charting. So they would double check each other's work. And, when you have that peer review and the errors kept on coming up of whatever care she was providing patients, I mean, that was huge. So, and scary.
Huge and scary. And then I think you mentioned that when you would make your visits back home and you were seeing her for, following the diagnoses, what were some of those things that were visual to you?
Just her hesitation with a lot of things. A really big one was she always, when she was asked a question, she would look to my dad first to kind of get that answer to that cue, to be able to be supported in that one. And the hard thing about it, too, is not knowing it back then, too. You really didn't pay much attention until it got really bad. So, there were years in there where we were there and she was active and she was on, and you're like, everything's fine. So you had years of where she was truly getting worse, but you didn't realize it because we didn't spend an enormous amount of time together.
And with your dad being the primary caregiver and seeing her all the time, he's probably not picking up on any of those little tics because they're so subtle. And one of the things I heard you say last night when we were talking about the episode was just that stopping and having a little bit of a vacant and kind of a confused look about what am I supposed to do, what just got said, how should I answer that? And then you just mentioned her looking at your dad.
Oh, yeah.
For some kind of reassurance, or did I hear that right? So you're seeing all of these, and they're not necessarily new to you because you're not seeing her all the time. You're getting bits and pieces of her every month or 2 months, and you're picking up on it right away. Did you ask your dad then what's been going on? What is he seeing?
I think not actually so much, particularly in the beginning of it. He was really diligent in keeping my brother and myself updated with what's going on. He kept it light just because I honestly thought he thought he could handle it. And he did for many years.
So with you being gone away from home, you didn't necessarily know what was going on in the beginning?
I knew what was going on, but did I acknowledge it? Did I really understand what was happening? No. I just thought my mom had some problems and Dad was taking care of it and they were doing good together.
Yeah, and there's no playbook back in the early 80s or 90s of what a person is supposed to do, how they're supposed to feel, what the person is going through, and what we should start to look for. But the reason that I have you on the podcast today, and I think the reason that you want to be here, is to help somebody who is going to get that same diagnosis at some point. You can shed a little bit of light on what that looks like from a daughter standpoint. And you can also tell them and our listeners that, yeah, it's tough and there's some denial, but at the same time, they're not alone. And for a little bit of time, you had mentioned that you thought you were the only family going through this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And just because it was probably one of those things that we're not going to talk about, and I've mentioned this with some of my guests previously who are in the late 40s, 50s to 60s, that we were all under the code of silence back then. You didn't talk about certain things because that's in the family. And we all know what that's like, and we all know what it's like to suppress that, and it doesn't always work out so well for some of us. But once we start to have some talk therapy and talk through and have people help us carry some of that stuff around, we start to feel a little bit better. Because our listeners want to hear how this turns out and the coping strategies that you use to work through this life-changing diagnosis, I need to talk about our sponsor one more time. Buck and Honey's has been with the Survive and Thrive 8791 crew since the beginning, with 4 locations in Madison, in the Madison area. One is always near. People ask why Buck and Honey's. Owner Tom Anderson places a high priority on the mental health of his employees. He has a mental health professional available for them should they need support. I don't know how many businesses go above and beyond their employee assistance program, but Buck and Honey's does. At age 56, Vicki Hens would be diagnosed with Alzheimer's, almost unheard of at the time in the mid-'80s or in the 90s, and especially maybe even in the whole state of Wisconsin. In segment 2, Stacy Mower will take us through what life was like for her and her family. Please stay tuned. Don't change that channel. You're not going to want to miss segment 2 of Survive and Thrive 8791. We will be back.
If you, a loved one, or someone you know is experiencing a physical, mental, or emotional crisis, there is help and resources out there. Contact NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness Helpline, at 1-800-950-6264. This is a free service providing information, resource referrals, and support to people living with a mental illness, their family, providers, and the public. United Way 211 is available 24/7, 365 and offers free confidential assistance. They connect people with the local programs and services that can help. Dial 211. Emergency Crisis Services, dial 911. The Suicide Prevention Lifeline, dial 988. To connect via web, chat, visit suicidepreventionlifeline.org. Along with those numbers, there is help. You just need to say 3 words. I need help. Now, back to the show.
We are back. Welcome back to segment 2 of Survive and Thrive 8791. I'm your host, Coach Tim Decora. The podcast is where I feature guests who share their story in hopes of helping others who may be struggling with what life throws at them. Stacy Mower is here today to talk about what it was like to have a parent diagnosed with Alzheimer's and what that's like to experience as a family, in this case, as a daughter. She's here today to share her story in hopes that her journey will help another family experiencing the same diagnosis of a loved one and help them to survive and thrive. So we're going to jump right in. Your dad, Dave Hintz, shared your mother's diagnosis with you at some point, and then things became very serious when your mom came to visit by herself, drove from Stevens Point to come down and visit daughter. And then I think you mentioned your son Ted was born and he was alive and kicking. Mm-hmm. Tell us what happened that was a major red flag.
Now that we've talked about it a little more, because we were talking about it last night, I am almost positive she came down for something relating to my wedding.
Your wedding? Mm-hmm. Oh, so this would be before.
This would be before, yeah, when right before Dino and I got married. Or maybe it was shortly after, but there was something associated with it during that. It was during that period, so it was 93 for sure. But she had driven her by herself because we thought she was doing pretty good. And we had a nice visit during the day. And when she drove back, instead of going north, she went south. Now, keep in mind, this was 93, so no cell phones. Probably had a map, but obviously no sense of direction.
Especially in Madison.
Coming out of Madison then. We lived downtown. We were on the east side, right by Monona Bay at the time. So getting out of town from there is not the easiest, even back then. And she ended up calling from the Chicago area. I don't know how deep she went, but she called my father and let him know that she was there and she was coming home. And then he called us to let us know that she was there. And that was really kind of where it was the kick of what is going on.
And to have that happen has to be a little unnerving. And
It was huge. I mean, thank goodness for, supporting me through everything that was with that one, because it was very nerve-wracking.
what was your mental health like during, let's just talk about that. What was your mental health like? What were you going through?
Just, looking back on it, I was working on starting my career, married, and then, those next steps of, home, children. So, I mean, sometimes I look back on those things, I'm like, how in the world did we do it? And then dealing with a debilitating illness that my mom was going through.
So you had a huge distraction then. Mm-hmm. A couple of years later, that helped you cope through this stuff.
Absolutely.
And what was that? That was your own family. So you're starting your family, and whether you knew it or not, that was probably something that you could use to help cope.
Definitely. And I was even thinking in particular of my brother and I, who were pretty darn close, and we talked all the time. And that was one thing, because both of us were going through it together. So that support level was huge.
You mentioned your dad, who was providing all of the in-home care for your mom at the time, and he was probably shielding you from some of the things that were going on at home. Or back then, she's my wife, I married her, she's not your wife, she's your mom. Mm-hmm. I will take care of her because that's what I'm supposed to do. And so he was protecting you, and then he allows you to live your life and raise your son when he was born. Eventually, the time came for your dad to move your mother to assisted living or memory care. I'm not even sure they had those names labeled back then. She probably just went into a nursing home. How did that transpire?
Well, it was just, it was that period where it was my dad's caregiving of her was affecting his health too. She was a wanderer, and was one of the reasons of needing to be in a locked area, because she would get up and leave, go to sleep at night. He would wake up in the middle of the night, and she would be gone out the door. And that was, obviously way before silver alerts or, being able to locate, family from there. And it was really, really taking its toll on him. So my aunts actually had I call it the intervention, but I don't know exactly what happened.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. And I could see both my aunts there with my dad and him not wanting to let her go, which, God bless him, he loved her and wanted to care for her, but it was time that he needed help. So they all bonded together as a family, said it's time.
And you mentioned leading up to this that, what was your dad going through? And you said, well, he would go to sleep, but he wouldn't really go to sleep. He would lay in bed or be up reading a book or whatever, and just waiting for her to get up in the middle of the night, and then he would have to help put her back to bed.
I think you talk to anybody who's in that caregiving situation where you have somebody who does not sit still, you are always on high alert.
And there's a reason that she didn't sit still. And what was that reason? It was a job she did forever.
Yeah, it was from nursing, from working the floors. That's one thing that her caregivers who took care of her mentioned quite frequently is, Vicki does our rounds with us. She actually wore out shoes. So that was one thing that my dad was maybe complained about, but was actually okay with it. Always having to get her some new shoes every few months while she was there.
Man, even carrying on despite her diagnosis and the symptoms that she was going through, she went back to what she always did and what she always knew, and that was to try to just replicate what she was always doing for her entire work life. Mm-hmm. At age 32, and that's how old you were, your mother finally succumbed to her diagnosis. What was that day like?
It was sad, but a relief at the same time. It's always so hard, and I think you're going to find this as you are talking with anybody who's had a parent, a loved one that's had Alzheimer's. You are mourning them way before the spirit finally goes. Because when they look at you without the recognition, that part of you just, it kills, it hurts. Sometimes you get mad at them. It's like, why don't you remember me? It's probably particularly as a child of someone going through that.
And this was your mom.
That's my mom.
And your mom, for all of those years that you had her, she was always the go-to. I know you said you had a very, very good relationship with your dad as well. But yeah, there's at some point when you start to see that bond that you had with any parent, whether it's a mother or father, when that starts to go and drift a little bit, that's something that's hard. How did you handle that whole situation?
Probably, thank goodness I had the balance of going to my dad as still, needing the parent. But, early in my life, my mom ceased being my mom. She was someone to love and care for and cherish and respect and do her best to make sure that she was happy as best she could be. And she always did still have a smile on her face, even to the end.
Your mom, despite losing her fight against this horrible disease diagnosis of Alzheimer's that affects, unfortunately, a lot of people. Your mom, because of her nursing background and being in the medical field, wanted to help even in her death. She wanted to help research of Alzheimer's. So talk a little bit about that.
I think my mom, had she lived, she might have actually gotten involved in IT, because I think that woman liked data. She liked research. She was always interested in understanding something a little bit more. She was in it, and she made her wishes known as soon as, while she was still cognizant, that she wanted to participate in any experimental trials, find out as much as she can about what was going on with it while she could still retain it. And then at her passing, she wanted to make sure that her body was donated to science to further the research on what was happening with her.
And you mentioned at some point there's no diagnosis, there's no blood test, there's no scratch the inside of the mouth to find out that, hey, here's what you have now, like you can almost do now. There wasn't any of that unless you did.
Or if I would have had a more intimate knowledge of medical processes back then. But again, that wasn't the thing growing up when we did, was that my dad stepped in and said, I've got this.
It's all fascinating, and it's touching to know that even she was going to help medical science to try to figure out, and if they had to use her to do that, to know that she did that, and it probably helped.
I think every little bit does.
Every little bit does. This is where the subscribers, followers, and listeners take out the notebooks, pens, or pencils, and they're going to jot some things down. Here are Stacy's 5 suggestions that allowed her to survive and thrive after her mother's Alzheimer's diagnosis, and then living a fruitful life without her. Here's what you shared, and I'm going to toss these in underhand, softball style. I'm going to say, go ahead and
all right,
swing away like you're at P.J. Jacobs Middle School. Swing away and hit the ball over the fence. Here are the 5 things. The first one, number 1, faith. Go ahead and hit that.
Born and raised Catholic. My mom and my dad were both Eucharistic ministers and participated in heavily in our church. And we used to call it the C&E majors for the longest time. Particularly when this was going on, you are challenged. Why? Why is this happening? What do I do with my life? What happens hereafter? And, that's where faith steps in. And had this not happened to my mother, would I still be as strong in my faith? I don't know. You have to be challenged to be able to find that within yourself.
And you did. and it definitely helped you through. Number 2, movies and reading.
I am a nerd. Oh, come on. I'm a Star Wars. I'm a Star Wars generation.
You're a Star Wars
Star Wars,
geek.
Star Trek, fantasy, anything. I have had a room full of unicorns growing up. Let's just say that.
And whatever, I always say, whatever helps you get through. I've often talked about back when I was going through some of my anxiety issues, and somebody said, you have to walk across hot coals for an hour each day. I would have did it. I really would have. And if you're saying that I need to watch movies and do some reading, I do half of that. I do a lot of reading. I should probably watch more movies. Number 3, support system. Hit that.
Oh, family, friends. I've got an extensive family, a fantastic one that I married into, inherited another brother and 2 wonderful sister-in-laws that have been my rocks through times. I had my in-laws, of course, and my brother, and then oodles of cousins and uncles and aunts that, truly cared. And that makes the biggest difference in the world. And, no privacy, because we all, we might try to be subtle about things, but no.
And then you have your pockets of, you've got your Spash people, Stevens Point people, your Plover people, your up north people, you've got your Wanakee people, and you talked about your work people, your work buddies. Hit that for a second.
Oh, well, I've got folks that I've worked with for 20 some years, even from, one company to another. I've got friendships that have lasted when I used to work at Famous Footwear, and we're still friends through the years. Those don't ever, you have to nourish them like you do any relationship. And I've been blessed.
And it's easy to do now. Send an email, send a text message. Number 4, I'm going to read this all the way until the end. Number 4, you're a lifelong learner and you're curious, but you called it, I just like to be nosy.
Nosy. I need to know the answer.
I need to know, what does that mean and how does it work?
Exactly.
Which is perfect for a person who is in IT, because you get thrown some curveballs.
I do. And a lot of things really came down to, how to handle high stress situations, how to really effectively communicate. Behavioral science is so interesting to me, and it's helped me in my career significantly.
It's good to be nosy. And number 5, your career. Hit that.
Let's see. Well, nutshell, I've been an employee of Summit Credit Union for 14 years, have bebopped around the IT department, supported a wide variety of, and trained and mentored through the years through this, learned a lot, worked with some very smart, fantastic people, and have been lucky enough to be able to work a hybrid status where I live in Iron River, Michigan, but do travel down here a couple times a month and spend a few days to work at the lovely headquarters at Cottage Grove.
Yeah, if you can get to a career that can allow you that flexibility, and certainly they just don't allow that to anybody. You got to have some experience, and you got to have some know-how and some trust in that you're going to get the job done. And that's obviously something that Summit has allowed you to do.
Absolutely.
I love it. What a great episode. I'm so glad you could join the Survive and Thrive 8791 crew today. Your story and how you've thrived after having your mom go through her last years with Alzheimer's is inspiring. It really is. And I knew this for quite a long time, but it is to hear it again and hear it from you right here makes it even more inspiring. Your story reminds us all to have coping skills or mental health tools in the toolbox. Despite your mom's diagnosis and the ripple effects it had on your family, you have survived and thrived. Our call to action. Stacy Mower just shared her story and what it's like to have a parent or family get a grim diagnosis at an early age. And she was 24 when that occurred. She went through a time of uncertainty, love, and grief, and came out a stronger person in the end. She hopes her story will let another family know that they are not alone, that it does happen. Here are Stacy's 5 suggestions that helped her survive and thrive during, and after. Number 1, faith. Number 2, movies and reading. Number 3, support system. That's family, friends. Number 4, lifelong learner. Be curious and be nosy. And number 5, have a career that you love. Final thoughts as we close another great episode of Survive and Thrive 8791. Are there any final thoughts, Stacy Mower?
Just thank you for this opportunity. Grateful that I'm able to share my story, and it was unexpected, and it was a lot of fun too.
Well, like I said, the podcast is to try to help people through the show, and then have guests come on and talk about their experiences. And unfortunately, we know that Alzheimer's and early onset dementia and cognitive disabilities are the norm now. And there are a lot of people out there that don't know what to do. They don't go in for therapy. But hey, can they listen to a podcast? Because there's this gal named Stacy, and her mom went through this as a young woman, and Stacy was a young woman. She can tell you how to go through it and how to come out in the end. And to be able to have a friend on here talk about it is, for me, really cool. On our next episode of Survive and Thrive 8791, we will have another amazing guest in the Buck and Honey's remote studios who will share how they learn to survive and thrive. If you have a story to share, or you know someone who does, please reach out to me at tdecora@gmail.com. Until next time, hang in there with whatever you happen to be going through, and with hard work, dedication, and determination, you can survive and thrive. Until next time, take care.